And thank you all for having me here today during National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's important for government officials and industry to promote cybersecurity awareness. From large businesses to mom and pop shops, everyone is at danger of a malicious attack if they aren't aware of the latest efforts to harm them. I constantly worry about my local businesses back home and local governments being forced to close from attack. I worry about ransomware attacks that shut down my local governments, whether it's city or county. With proper awareness, we as a government and industry officials can prevent many of these harmful attacks. And I thank you all for coming to this effort. Yet cybersecurity can't just be a once-a-year focus. We need to constantly educate the public on the dangers they face and reduce their vulnerabilities. On my committee, Homeland Security, I'll talk about a few issues. First, since cybersecurity isn't limited to the month of October, it's been a major focus in my efforts on the committee. And first, if you don't know Representative John Katko, who's the subcommittee chair for cybersecurity on our committee, you need to get to know him. He's doing a great job in that area. But in our committee, we're focused on three things: CISA, critical infrastructure, and emerging technologies. First, let me take CISA. One of the most important moments in my career was when President Trump signed into law the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Act, centralizing the federal government's protection of critical infrastructure from physical cyber threats into one office. I believe will prove to be a wise decision. As with all new government agencies, making sure that CISA is stood up correctly is important to its success. That is why I've been working closely with DHS to ensure that that happens. I believe that Director Chris Krebs is the right person to lead the agency, and he's doing a great job. We couldn't have gotten a better person. While Director Krebs is working to stand up the agency and fulfill its mission, Congress has a role to play in helping CISA. At this point, Congress and the executive branch should do everything we can to see that CISA is a well-oiled machine. Part of that is staying out of the way until they need us to get involved. Since I believe in the mission of CISA, I want to make sure it has the resources it needs to be successful. I will work to make sure that the appropriations and human capital necessary are there for them to lead in their efforts to thwart nation states and dangerous hackers. I will work to make sure it is the one voice for all federal government agencies. But what does concern me is that other departments and agencies are creating their own cybersecurity offices. We can't have multiple agencies undermining each other. Stovepiping is not the solution. Congress created CISA to be the lead for the federal government, and we need to ensure that that happens. One issue that CISA is tackling right now is managing risk to our supply chain. This is also a topic we are exploring at the committee. Just last week, we had an informative hearing on the vulnerabilities of our supply chain. I'm pleased that CISA created in DHS a supply chain risk management task force. That task force is in the process of drawing up recommendations to identify and manage risk to the global information and communications technology supply chain. The task force released an interim report and is expected to announce its full recommendations next year. I look forward to reading it and, if necessary, acting on it. Next, critical infrastructure. This is another issue area that both the committee and CISA believe are important to tackle, and that is securing our critical infrastructure. As we saw in the September attacks on Saudi Arabia, attacks on critical infrastructure are key pillars for nation states and terrorist organizations in their efforts to promote their agendas. Our economy and way of life run through critical infrastructure every day. Congress and industry must do everything we can to secure our critical infrastructure and prevent deadly and costly attacks. Yet there's no one-size-fits-all solution for industry. What works for chemical security will not work for pipeline security. I've taken the approach of looking at the critical infrastructure ecosystem and working to ensure its resilience against attacks. But the federal government can't do it alone. We need to work with industry to protect and harden this nation's critical infrastructure from physical and cyber attacks. Earlier this year, we passed an extension of the CFAS program. This is something that we have to deal with before it expires next year. Our committee passed a bill that I opposed. It sits in the Energy and Commerce Committee, where it has little chance of moving in its current form. Senate Homeland Security Chairman Ron Johnson has said, in his view, he sees CFAS differently than this bill. In other words, the bill is dead on arrival in the Senate. And I know industry has its views on the program, but by using CFATS as an example, you can see how this complex issue is a complex issue that's not easily solvable. But the good news is that we have the same goal, and that's to harden and protect all critical infrastructure from attack. I'm ready to work with industry, my fellow members in Congress, and the administration to ensure that a Saudi-like attack does not occur on American soil. Now let's talk about emerging technologies. Emerging technologies present another daunting task. If technology advanced at a reasonably slow and understandable fashion, we probably wouldn't have to be concerned about attacks on it. That's not how technology works. It evolves and advances in leaps and bounds, not baby steps. What is new and fast today is obsolete and slow by next week. These emerging technologies rapidly outpace conversation on cybersecurity. That makes securing technologies difficult. As I think about these technologies, I worry about our ability to prevent attacks. AI, machine learning, 5G networks, and quantum computing are all coming to fruition. They represent great strides in human ingenuity, but they also represent enormous security challenges. As industry and the federal government turn to these new developments, we must understand how they can be used against us. And this is not a civilian issue, it's also a military issue. I sit on the House Armed Services Committee, and the military is exploring these technologies for both offensive and defensive capabilities. I know I've said this already today, but industry and the federal government must work together on these security issues that we face as technologies come online. But I implore you not to forget how these technologies affect hardware stores, local businesses, county and city municipalities across America. Fortune 500 companies have the resources to throw at cybersecurity. Most of these small entities don't. Now, workforce. One of my top priorities this year has been to address the federal cyber workforce shortage. I'm not the first legislator to try to tackle this. I know I heard your previous presenter make reference to the shortage. There's over 300,000 cyber jobs vacant in this country that need to be filled. We've seen proposals before, from pay reform to apprenticeships to scholarships. One thing the House did this year in the National Defense Authorization Act was to create a Cyber Defense Academy. This is a pilot program that will train veterans as cybersecurity personnel at the Department of Defense, and I support its goal. Yet this proposal, like others, does not address the core workforce problem, and that's competitive salaries. Simply put, the government cannot compete with the private sector on pay and benefits. For instance, at entry-level engineering salary at companies like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft start above $150,000. A top-level Google engineer can make more than $600,000 a year. There is no way the federal government can compete with these salaries. But it is time for us to start talking about pay reform for the government workforce in the cybersphere. We can't address the multitude of problems I've outlined today unless we have a top-notch cyber workforce. Now I want to talk about China. We all know cybersecurity is not just a technology issue. It is global. It is a geopolitical issue. China, Russia, and other adversaries are seizing on society's commitment to openness, free speech, and innovation. Rather than build a competitive advantage, they've just decided to steal one. China openly touts its plan to become the world's premier power by brute force and outright theft. We clearly have a host of cybersecurity problems that need to be addressed to counter China's geopolitical ambitions. We have begun to take steps to address them across the government. The Trump administration is taking steps on China's seriously. Entire sectors of the economy and nearly every part of our government is in China's crosshairs. Technology that can't be squeezed out of companies doing business in China is deliberately being poached from U.S. companies and at universities. FBI Director Chris Wray said earlier this year that the FBI is actively investigating over 1,000 cases of IP theft in the United States, mostly involving China. By using the world's rapid technological developments, the Communist Party can control China like never before. Big data is powering social credits monitoring to shame those who don't support every party policy. Advances in machine learning are empowering systematic extermination of the Uyghurs in Western China. China is using facial recognition to detect ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs and then systematically tracking them. Our open media platforms are now weapons of Chinese messaging, monitoring, and intelligence operations. These cybersecurity concepts are the primary means of geopolitical competition in the 21st century. Intelligence officials have warned public and private entities about telecommunication companies like Huawei and ZTE and their ties to the Chinese Communist Committee. These companies have been directed to conduct surveillance and turn over heaps of data to the Chinese government on Chinese citizens and foreigners alike. Beijing will use this power again and again. State-owned Chinese companies have systematically dominated manufacturing operations of critical components. They also offer Chinese intelligence services across all levels of their supply chain. China is also exploiting higher education institutions that produce cutting-edge technology and research. The Communist Party is sending students and researchers to our institutions of higher education with a clear plan to steal U.S. research and engage in espionage. Recently at a Midwestern medical school, a Chinese researcher was arrested for economic espionage after he stole a patented cancer research compound. He also then tried to delete the research off the university's computer system on a cancer compound. Now, if Chinese government and its agents are willing to erase key cancer research, what else will they do? We've seen these so-called academics target military intelligence, exported restricted research data, and other classified information. We cannot turn a blind eye to China's growing exploitation of the open and collaborative nature of our academic institutions. Last year, the National Vetting Center was created to improve vetting of individuals seeking a visa to work in high-value technologies in our company. We can do more to improve vetting of foreign students and scholars engaging in sensitive fields of study in the U.S. institutions. China is also using technology and the size of its economy to export authoritarianism by attempting to censor speech abroad. This effort was on full display last month. We saw the NBA capitulate to China after the Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey tweeted support for the Hong Kong protesters. In response to that tweet, the NBA issued a press release in both English and in another one in Chinese. In the English, the league said it regretted the tweet and that offended the Chinese people. In the Chinese release, the NBA said they were extremely disappointed by Morey's inappropriate tweet. This isn't the first time that we've seen American companies get swept up by Chinese censorship. In Apple's most recent iPhone software update, it removed the Hong Kong and Macau flag emojis in China. Apple has pulled apps from its store, including one used by Hong Kong protesters to mark police locations and street closures. Search providers like Google and Microsoft admit that they serve sanitized results to users in China. Now, I'm concerned these companies have missed the point of economic engagement with China. Opening up China was supposed to put the forces of freedom and individualism in the driver's seat. Instead, Chinese government is using openness to force outside companies to promote Chinese propaganda. We must be concerned about this rise of wholly Chinese-owned tech companies. If you're worried about what Facebook and Google is doing with your data, imagine what a platform under China's thumb would do with your information. For instance, the Chinese-owned video sharing app, TikTok, has already been downloaded more than 1 billion times. China is already using TikTok to push its own propaganda. If a user searches for Hong Kong on TikTok, you'll find conveniently it ignores the ongoing protest over there. China will continue to use apps like these as another tool to bring censorship to our shores. Ultimately, China is advancing all these efforts with the goal of global supremacy. China is deliberately targeting emerging technologies that have the potential to transform our society as a part of its Made in China 2025 initiative. We clearly have a host of cybersecurity problems that need to be addressed to counter China, Russia, and other bad actor geopolitical ambitions. We have begun to take steps to address them across the government. The Trump administration treats China seriously. I applaud that the President's May executive order aimed at securing information and communications technology in our supply chain. I look forward to reviewing the Department of Commerce's rule implementing this order in the coming weeks. The President is also using trade tools to try and extract concessions from China on these issues. While free trade and open markets are the ideal, the Chinese government deliberately undermines global markets at our expense. I encourage the President to continue to hold China's feet to the fire until they seriously reform how they do business. In closing, cybersecurity challenges that I've outlined today across borders, governments, and private entities. Collaboration and the whole of society approach is necessary to address the host of cybersecurity vulnerabilities that rivals present. It also requires bipartisan cooperation in Congress. I'm ready and willing to partner with anyone who shares the desire to push back against China and other adversaries to protect not only America's place as an innovator and global leader, but the ideals of liberty, freedom, and democracy. Thank you for having me.